The sound hit the waiting room like a gunshot. Not the crack of the storm outside, the one that had been clawing at the glass walls of Hargrove Regional Airport for the past 3 hours, stacking snow against the tarmac in drifts that swallowed the runway lights whole. No. This was different. This was the sound of a human body hitting polished concrete. Evelyn Marsh's left shoulder took the full impact first. She didn't cry out. That was the thing that would stay with Wyatt Cole for the rest of his life, that she didn't make a single sound. Her wheelchair skidded 6 feet across the floor of Gate 7's holding lounge, tipped and went down, and Evelyn Marsh folded with it like she'd practiced how to fall without screaming, because somewhere along the line life had made her practice it enough. The man who'd done it, Trent the Ox in the tailored overcoat, who served as lead security for Julian Voss, didn't even look at her. He planted one hand on the overturned wheelchair, like it was a piece of furniture he'd moved out of his way, and turned back to his employer. "Path's clear, Mr. Voss." Julian Voss stepped through the gate entrance the way kings once walked into conquered cities. He was 62, had the jaw of a man who'd never lost an argument, and the eyes of a man who'd never needed to. Behind him, 4 handlers wrestled a convoy of hard-shell transport cases, brushed aluminum aerospace-grade locks, the kind of cases that didn't carry clothes. They were the size of steamer trunks, and the handlers moved them like they weighed the same as loaded weapons, because at least 2 of them probably did. Voss didn't look at Evelyn either. Wyatt Cole was sitting in the far corner of the gate lounge, 3rd row from the back, the seat he'd chosen specifically because it kept his back to the wall and gave him sight lines to all 3 exits. Old habit. The kind of habit that kept men breathing in places where breathing wasn't guaranteed. He was 41 years old and looked it in the way that mountains look their age, not diminished, just carved. The scar that ran from his left jaw to his collarbone wasn't hidden under anything. He'd stopped trying. His hands rested on his knees, both palms down, a conscious position his VA therapist had given him to stay grounded when the walls started breathing. The walls had been breathing for 20 minutes. The storm outside had a sound, a specific high-frequency howl, when it hit the gap between the jet bridge and the terminal wall, and that sound lived in the same register as incoming mortar fire on a ridgeline in Kunar province. And Wyatt's nervous system did not care one single bit that he was currently in Montana. The leash in his right hand was 6 feet of military-grade nylon. At the other end of it sat Gunnar. Gunnar was a Belgian Malinois, 74 pounds of nothing but intention. His coat was the color of burnt wheat. One ear had a small V-shaped notch from a wire fence in Helmand. He was 8 years old and still moved like he was 2, which was either a gift or a warning, depending on your relationship with him. Right now, Gunnar was watching Wyatt's face the way a spotter watches a shooter, completely without interruption, reading every microshift. When Evelyn's chair hit the floor, Gunnar's head snapped toward the sound. His ears went flat. Then Trent stepped over her and something changed in the dog's posture, something in the hinge of the haunches, the weight distribution across all 4 paws. Wyatt loosened his grip on the leash. 1 inch. 2. He didn't give Gunnar a command. He didn't need to. They had been working together for 5 years, and in that time they had developed the kind of shorthand that other people spend entire marriages reaching for and never finding. The lounge had 31 other people in it. Every single one of them was watching Julian Voss's entrance, the casual theater of money moving through public space, which meant not a single one of them was watching the dog. Gunnar did not go for Trent. He did not bare his teeth at Julian Voss. He did not behave like an animal that had been provoked. He crossed the 30 feet of terminal floor in 4 seconds, moving low and fast and silent, and when he reached the convoy of aluminum cases, he stopped, sat, and barked. Not once. Not a warning yip. He barked in the sustained, rhythmic, ear-splitting pattern that Wyatt recognized from every joint exercise and every real-world deployment, the pattern drilled into military working dogs, to signal one specific category of threat. Explosive material, or controlled substances. Danger classification critical. The sound cut through the storm noise and the gate announcements and the murmur of 31 oblivious people like a blade. Wyatt was already on his feet, because he knew what that alert meant. Not what it looked like. What it meant. Trent's cruelty had just become the smallest problem in the room. 15 minutes earlier, Gate 7 had been quiet enough that Wyatt could hear the snow, not the storm, the individual flakes hitting the glass. That was how bad it had gotten tonight. His hearing had sharpened back down to combat calibration, which meant his brain was no longer fully convinced it was 2024, and he was no longer fully convinced he was in Montana. He'd chosen the corner seat back to the wall before the lounge had filled. Old discipline. He'd set his duffel between his boots, clipped Gunner's vest, and told himself the same thing. He told himself every time he had to be in a public space with fluorescent lights and unpredictable noise. You are not there. You are here. Count the exits. 3 exits. He counted them twice. Gunner settled across his boots like a sandbag. Deliberate, trained weight, and Wyatt held the leash loose and breathed through his nose the way the VA therapist had shown him. 4 counts in, hold 7, 8 out. It worked for about 11 minutes. Then the storm shifted. The wind found the gap between the jet bridge seal and the terminal wall, that specific quarter-inch gap that the maintenance crew had probably put a work order in for back in October, and nobody had gotten to, and it screamed through it at exactly the pitch and frequency of incoming ordnance on a high ridgeline. Not like it. Not similar to it. Exactly it. The same note. The same duration. Wyatt's hands were off his knees before he knew he'd moved them. The lounge dissolved. Montana dissolved. What replaced it was a mountainside in Kunar province at 0340 hours, black sky wind so cold it had a taste and the specific sound of a team of 12 men who had walked into something they weren't going to walk out of. He could smell the cordite. He could feel the rock under his boots. He could hear Rodriguez calling out a grid that nobody was ever going to reach in time, and he could feel the weight of the choice he'd made in the next 4 seconds, the choice that kept him alive and kept Rodriguez's name on a wall in D.C. instead of his own. His breathing had gone ragged. He could hear it too fast, too shallow, and knowing it wasn't the same as being able to stop it. His left hand had a white-knuckle grip on the armrest, and his right was pulling the leash tighter without meaning to, which was the one thing you were never supposed to do because Gunner could feel tension travel down nylon like electricity. He felt the weight before he registered what it was. 74 pounds of Belgian Malinois stepped off his boots and onto his chest. Not jumped. Stepped with the deliberate, measured pressure of an animal that had been trained in deep pressure therapy and understood at some level that went beyond commands exactly what it was doing. Gunner placed both front paws on Wyatt's sternum, positioned his full weight forward, and held it there. The compression was firm and steady and real, in a way that the Kunar ridgeline suddenly wasn't. Then the dog's tongue found his face. Cold, rough, insistent, dragging across his left cheek where the skin had gone tight and wet without Wyatt noticing. Gunner licked away the tears with the complete absence of judgment that only dogs and very young children are still capable of, and Wyatt put both arms around the dog's torso and pressed his forehead into the warm wheat-colored fur at the base of Gunner's neck, and just breathed. In. Hold. Out. The ridgeline faded. The lounge came back. Fluorescent lights. 31 strangers. Snow on glass. He didn't know how long they stayed like that. Long enough. When he lifted his head, the woman across the aisle was watching him. She was maybe mid-50s, with silver hair pulled back, and the kind of face that had been shaped by a long time of dealing with difficulty without making it anyone else's problem. She sat in a manual wheelchair, a paperback open in her lap, and she was watching him the way people only watch each other when they've decided not to pretend they didn't see something. She didn't offer sympathy, didn't tilt her head the way people did when they were performing concern. She just looked at him, and then at Gunner, and then back at him, and she nodded once the way one person nods to another when the only honest thing to say is, "I see you. You're still here." She smiled. Small and warm, the kind of warmth that has to work hard to exist in a place this cold. Wyatt exhaled for what felt like the first time in 15 minutes. Gunnar turned his head toward the woman tail, moving once, twice, slow and dignified. Nothing like the frantic wag of a dog seeking approval. More like an acknowledgement. Then the doors at the far end of the lounge swung open. Julian Voss walked in like he owned the building, the tarmac, and everything the storm had touched for 50 miles in every direction. His 4 handlers followed with the aluminum cases. And Trent, broad, blank-faced Trent, walked point, already scanning the room for obstacles. Evelyn Marsh's wheelchair was apparently one of them. The warmth lasted exactly 4 more seconds. Then came the sound, that hard, hollow crack of metal and concrete, and the warmth was gone, and Wyatt was already rising from his seat. Wyatt had a rule he'd carried since Coronado: never act angry. Anger was loud. Anger telegraphed. The men who survived the longest in the places he'd been sent were the ones who could be completely lethally calm while everything around them was coming apart. He crossed the lounge floor in 4 steps. Trent saw him coming and squared up 240 professional muscle, the kind of man who got paid to make problems go away before they reached his employer. He pulled back his right shoulder weight, shifting to his rear foot, reading Wyatt as a civilian with poor judgment and a dog. That misread cost him the first 2 seconds. Wyatt didn't stop walking. He didn't announce himself. He didn't tell Trent what was about to happen. He closed the distance, dropped his center of gravity in the last step, and redirected Trent's extended forearm downward and across with both hands, the kind of joint manipulation that doesn't look like much from 20 feet away and feels like a car door closing on your wrist from the inside. Trent's knees hit the floor. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. 3 seconds. Julian Voss turned, opened his mouth, and got 1 syllable out, something that started with, "Do you know?" before. Wyatt's left hand caught him by the lapels of that $8,000 overcoat and walked him backward into the row of seats, with enough controlled force to sit him down hard and keep him there. Wyatt leaned in close. His voice didn't rise. "Stay down." 2 words. The kind of 2 words that men with Julian Voss's money very rarely hear and almost never believe. But there is a specific register of human voice that bypasses the thinking brain entirely and speaks directly to the part that has kept the species alive since before it could talk. Voss heard it. His body believed it before his ego could object. 7 seconds. Total. No shouting. No chaos. 31 people in the lounge, and half of them hadn't looked up yet. Wyatt turned back to Evelyn. She'd pushed herself to sitting on the floor, shoulder braced against the overturned chair, jaw set against pain she wasn't going to hand to anybody. He crouched, got a hand under the chair frame, righted it, and held it steady while she worked herself back into the seat. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Her eyes said she'd handled worse and appreciated being treated like someone who could. That was when Gunnar moved. Wyatt had forgotten in the 4 seconds of pure mechanical focus that he'd loosened the leash before he crossed the room. Gunnar had his own agenda now, and it had nothing to do with Trent or Voss. The dog went back to the aluminum cases. He'd been trained in narcotics detection across 14 compound classifications and explosive precursor identification across 9. His nose contained 300 million scent receptors and a decade of operational memory. He worked the row of cases the way a surgeon works, deliberate, unhurried, with total confidence in his own read. He stopped at the 3rd case, sat down, barked the alert sequence once clean and sharp. Then he did something Wyatt had only seen him do twice in 5 years of field work. He pawed at the case, one deliberate scrape of his right paw at the seam of the lid, requesting physical access the way he'd been trained to when the alert was highest priority. Wyatt looked at the case, looked at Gunnar, made a decision. Show me. Gunnar needed nothing else. He went at the seam of the case with focused, methodical force claws, designed to grip mountain terrain, finding purchase in the gap between lid and body, and the cheap internal latch that someone had substituted for the advertised aerospace-grade hardware gave way in seconds. The lid peeled back. Under a false floor of foam padding packed in vacuum-sealed plastic crystalline white powder, in quantities that didn't suggest personal use. And beneath that, nested in cut foam like museum pieces components. Machined metal. The kind of parts that, assembled correctly, become something no commercial flight manifest in any country should ever carry. The air in Gate 7 changed. 31 people finally looked up. Julian Voss's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds: shock, calculation, fury, decision, and landed on the one Wyatt recognized as the most dangerous, the face of a man who has a contingency plan and is now executing it. Voss reached into his breast pocket. Not for a phone. He pressed 2 buttons on a small device and looked at the doors. They opened 8 seconds later. Sheriff Dale Dawson came through First County badge on his chest, and behind him the 6 officers in tactical gear weapons, already at low ready, moving, with the practiced formation of men who'd been briefed before they walked in. Dawson's eyes passed over the open case, over Evelyn on the floor, over Trent still cradling his wrist, and came to rest on Wyatt Cole. He raised one finger and pointed. "That man and the dog, now!" Every weapon in the room swung left, toward Wyatt, toward Gunnar, not toward the open case, not toward the pale crystals catching the fluorescent light, not toward Julian Voss, who was already smoothing his lapels and breathing like a man who'd just watched a chess piece fall exactly where he'd pushed it. Wyatt had been in rooms where the odds were bad before, rooms where the math didn't work in his favor, and the exit was behind the people trying to kill him. He knew what it felt like to calculate survival in fractions of a second and come up short. But those rooms had been in places where violence was the acknowledged language, where everyone present understood the grammar of it. This was different. This was 6 officers with tactical gear and legal authority, and a sheriff who already knew exactly which story he was going to tell when this was over. There was no math here. The math had been done before Dawson walked through the door. Wyatt set the leash down on the floor, slowly. Both hands came up. "On your knees." Dawson's voice carried the particular flatness of a man who'd rehearsed this. "Hands behind your head." Julian Voss stood to the side, arms folded, watching with the patient expression of a man waiting for room service to finish setting the table. "That case is open," Wyatt said, keeping his voice level. "You want to talk about what's in it before... On your knees. Last time." Wyatt went down. Cold floor through his jeans, he kept his eyes on Gunnar. Gunnar was still sitting beside the open case, still in alert position, still doing exactly what 8 years of training had built him to do, holding the find, maintaining the signal, waiting for his handler to complete the chain of custody that made the evidence mean something in a court of law. The dog looked at Wyatt. His ears came forward. 2 of Dawson's officers moved toward him. Gunnar saw them coming and stood. Not aggressive, not yet, but present. Every muscle in his body awake and reading the room. He planted himself between the officers and the open case like he'd been told to guard it, because functionally he had been. "Control your animal," Dawson said. "He's in alert position on a live find," Wyatt said. "That's evidence in that case. You touch it without..." The first officer reached for Gunnar's collar. Gunnar's response was instantaneous, and completely within his training, he snapped once at the reaching hand, teeth closing on air as a warning, then shifted his weight back and planted harder. "Guard posture. Do not breach." The officer stepped back, pulled his baton. Wyatt saw what was coming before it happened, and was already pushing back to his feet, when the second officer hit him from behind, both hands shoving him forward into the first officer's grip, and the baton came around in a short arc toward Gunnar's ribcage. The sound it made when it connected was something Wyatt would hear for the rest of his life. Gunnar yelped, sharp, single, involuntary, the sound of an animal that does not make noise from pain, and just had pain it couldn't contain. He staggered left, one rear leg buckling, and then he found his footing, and he turned toward the officer who'd struck him and the sound that came out of him then was not a yelp. It was something older. Something that came from before training, before Coronado, before any human hand had shaped him into what he was. He lunged, got the baton in his teeth, and wrenched it sideways with a force that snapped the officer's grip and sent the weapon spinning across the floor. "Don't—" Wyatt was on his feet, officers grabbing both his arms. "Don't shoot him. Do not shoot that dog." Two officers had their sidearms up, pointed at Gunner, who stood between them and the case with his legs braced and blood darkening the fur along his right flank where the baton had connected. Wyatt stopped fighting the hands on his arms. He looked at Gunner. Gunner looked back at him. Chest heaving, blood on his side. Both ears forward waiting. 11 years of working dogs, of reading their faces, of learning what lived behind those eyes. And Wyatt knew with complete and devastating clarity that if he gave the command to stand down, Gunner would stand down. Because Gunner trusted him. Unconditionally. Absolutely. The way that only a dog that has spent years watching a man bleed and break and hold himself together can trust. And if he didn't give the command, they were going to shoot his dog in an airport in Montana, in front of 31 people, and there was not one thing Wyatt Cole could do to stop it. His throat closed. He made himself open it. "Gunner!" His voice cracked on the second syllable, and he didn't try to stop it. "Stand down." Gunner held the position for one more second, looking at him, asking if he was sure, asking if there was another option, and then sat slow and stiff and lowered his head. The animal control officers came in from the side entrance, 2 of them, with the kind of poles you use when you don't trust what you're handling. One loop went over Gunner's neck, then another. They dragged him toward the service exit. Gunner didn't fight. He walked stiffly, one leg bearing weight wrong, and at the door he turned back and looked at Wyatt one final time across the length of the gate lounge. Then the door closed behind him, and the Montana storm swallowed the sound of his nails on the concrete outside. Wyatt felt the darkness move in from the edges, the old dark, the Kunar dark. He let the officers walk him toward the service corridor, because there was nothing left in him to spend on resistance. Behind him, Julian Voss straightened his tie. The interrogation room smelled like burnt coffee and old fear. It was a repurposed storage closet behind the airport's security office, a folding table, 2 metal chairs, one overhead bulb that buzzed on a frequency designed to make your teeth ache. Wyatt had been in worse. He'd been in rooms with dirt floors and no light at all. But those rooms hadn't come with a clock on the wall, and this one did. And the clock was what was killing him. p.m. Dawson had told him very precisely that the county animal control facility closed at midnight. That after midnight, the overnight protocol was simple. Any animal flagged as dangerous and unclaimed got processed first thing in the morning. Processed was the word Dawson had used. He'd let the weight of it sit there on the table between them like something he'd put down on purpose. Julian Voss sat across from Wyatt, jacket off now, sleeves rolled. Up close, without the performance of the entrance, he looked like what he actually was, a man who had spent 40 years buying outcomes and saw no reason to stop now. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "It's straightforward," Voss said. "Voluntary psychiatric hold. You sign you acknowledge the episode in the lounge was the result of service-related mental health crisis. The dog gets reclassified from dangerous to retired service animal, transferred to a facility in Billings. Comfortable. Monitored." He paused. "Alive." Wyatt looked at the paper. Didn't touch it. The form was pre-filled. His name, his service record summary, a checkbox next to the words, "Episode of delusional aggression precipitated by PTSD event." At the bottom, a line for his signature and a line for Dawson's witness signature, which was already there. Dawson had signed before he'd even walked Wyatt into this room. "The case," Wyatt said. "The open case with the lawfully transported pharmaceutical compounds and machine components with valid export documentation." Voss's voice carried the particular smoothness of a sentence that had been prepared by lawyers. "Your dog destroyed private property and you assaulted 2 men. That's the record. Wyatt looked at the clock. 10:49. He thought about Gunnar in the back of that animal control truck. About the way Gunnar had looked at him across the lounge before the door closed, not accusatory, not confused, just watching, still trusting. The absolute worst kind of trust to be handed when you can't honor it. He thought about Rodriguez's name on a wall in D.C., about every decision he'd made in 7 seconds on a ridgeline that he would carry for the rest of his life. He picked up the paper. Voss leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Wyatt looked at it for a long moment, at his pre-filled name, at Dawson's waiting signature, at the checkbox next to delusional aggression, 2 words that would follow him into every VA file, every security clearance review, every room he tried to walk into for the rest of his life with whatever was left of his credibility. He set the paper back down on the table, turned it to face Voss, and spit on it. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Voss's face did the thing it had done in the lounge, moved through expressions quickly, and landed on cold. "That's a choice," he said quietly. "You understand what that means for the animal." "I understand exactly what it means," Wyatt said. "I also understand that evidence doesn't disappear because you've got a bought sheriff and a clean piece of paper. Gunnar's alert is on record the second he sat down in that lounge. 31 witnesses. Whatever your documentation says, a military working dog with a confirmed alert creates probable cause that no county form can retroactively erase. It was the truest thing he'd said all night. It was also, he knew, not enough. Not in this room, not with this clock. Dawson straightened by the door. "Take him to holding." In the main terminal, the storm had eased to the kind of cold that didn't move. It just sat on everything. Most of the 31 passengers from Gate 7 had been shuffled to the main concourse, given vouchers told to wait. Evelyn Marsh had been shuffled with them, which was exactly what she'd expected, because people with county sheriff badges and something to hide never looked twice at the woman in the wheelchair. She'd positioned herself near the south corridor door, close enough to the service hallway to have heard raised voices far enough away to look like she was simply waiting for a flight that wasn't coming. Her carry-on was in her lap. She reached into the outer pocket. The phone was 4 inches long, matte black with no manufacturer markings. Its encryption handshake operated on a rotating satellite frequency that cycled every 90 seconds. She'd carried it for 2 years without using it in the field, because in 2 years she had not had what she needed. Gunnar's alert had changed that. A military working dog's confirmed narcotics and ordnance signal constituted probable cause under federal statute. It was cleaner than anything she'd built through 2 years of surveillance, financial mapping, and source cultivation. It was a federal judge's signature waiting to happen. She pressed the call button. 1 ring. A voice she knew answered immediately. "Marsh, talk to me. I need a federal warrant and a tactical response team at Hargrove Regional," she said. "Voss is here. The product is here. And I need them in the next 45 minutes, or a decorated veteran's dog gets put down in a county facility, and the whole chain of evidence walks out the door in an aluminum case." A pause on the line. "Just one." "Copy that. Stand by." Evelyn lowered the phone to her lap and looked out at the snow pressing against the terminal glass. Somewhere out in that dark, a dog was waiting in a cold truck, trusting that the people around him were worth trusting. She intended to make that true. The animal control truck was parked on the service road behind the terminal engine, idling exhaust, rising into the black Montana sky. Inside the rear compartment, in a wire kennel bolted to the floor, Gunnar lay on his side. He wasn't unconscious. His eyes were open, tracking the small movements of the truck's chassis in the wind. His right flank had been wrapped in a strip of gauze by one of the animal control officers, a young woman named Priya, who had done it quietly without being asked, because she had a dog at home and couldn't not do it. The wrapping had already darkened at the center. But Gunnar's breathing was steady, and his ears moved at every sound, cataloging the world outside the kennel with the same patient attention he brought to everything. He was waiting. He was always waiting for the same thing. At 11:23 p.m., the waiting ended in a way that nobody in Hargrove County would describe accurately for years afterward, because the human brain tends to compress the memory of things that happen very fast and very loud into a single impression rather than a sequence. The impression was this: the sky came down. Two federal helicopters dropped out of the overcast at rooftop-level rotors, hammering the storm into submission, their searchlights turning the snow-covered tarmac into a white operating table. They didn't land. They held position 30 feet above the service road, and from their side doors, fast-roped a 12-person tactical element in FBI windbreakers over body armor, moving with the compressed urgency of people who had been briefed, were angry about what they'd been briefed on, and had exactly zero patience for anyone who got in their way. The terminal's north-facing windows, the ones overlooking the service road, didn't break so much as surrender the pressure differential from the rotors finding the aging seals and persuading them to fail all at once in a single cascading shatter that swept glass across the concourse floor like a wave pulling back from shore. Inside Gate 7's holding lounge, every remaining passenger hit the floor. Julian Voss did not hit the floor. He stood very still, the color leaving his face in a way that was almost clinical to watch as the south corridor door came off its hinges under a federal ram, and 4 agents in full kit flowed through the opening with the kind of coordinated economy that told you this was not their first door. Behind them, pushing her own wheelchair with both hands, because she was not going to be pushed into this room by anyone, came Evelyn Marsh. She was different now. Same silver hair, same quiet face, but the paperback was gone, and in its place she held a federal badge case open at shoulder height, the gold catching the emergency lighting in a way that was entirely unintentional and entirely perfect. Her voice filled the room without effort. It was the voice of someone who had spent 2 years eating bad food in bad motels, building a case file that had grown to 400 pages, waiting for a moment that a dog's nose had finally made possible. Julian Voss, you are under arrest pursuant to federal warrant on charges including narcotics trafficking, illegal arms transport, and obstruction of justice. She let that land for exactly 1 second. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone except your attorney. Voss's mouth opened. One of the agents put a hand on his shoulder and he sat down. Dawson was in the corner, hand moving toward his badge in the instinctive gesture of a man reaching for authority he was about to lose. Rear Admiral Thomas Carver, who had come in on the second helicopter, because when one of his former SEAL operators was sitting in a county holding cell. He made it his business to be present, walked directly to Dawson, stopped 8 inches from him, and held out his hand, not to shake. Dawson unpinned his badge and placed it in the Admiral's palm. Carver pocketed it without looking at it and walked to the holding cell corridor. They'd put Wyatt in a room with no clock, which was either oversight or cruelty, and he'd lost track of time completely. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall in the dark place, not Kunar, not fully, but the anteroom of it, when he heard the bolt on the door. Carver came in first. Didn't say anything. Crouched down, got a hand under Wyatt's arm and pulled him to his feet with the straightforward physical assistance of a man who had seen operators come back from worse and knew that dignity required not making a production of it. Gunner, Wyatt said. That was all. Service road, Carver said. Go. Wyatt went. He moved through the terminal at a run, past the shattered windows, past the federal agents processing Voss's cases, past 31 passengers who parted without being asked, and hit the service exit door with both hands. The cold outside was absolute. Stars had broken through where the storm had finally spent itself, and the snow on the tarmac reflected the helicopter searchlights in a way that turned the whole service road silver and white. The animal control truck's rear door was open. Priya stood beside it. The kennel door already unlatched, her face doing the thing faces do when something is about to happen that they want to have witnessed. Gunner came out. Not fast, his right side was stiff, and he came down the ramp 1 careful step at a time, his nose already working the cold air, already sorting through the 10,000 things the wind carried, until he found the one that mattered. He found it. The careful steps stopped. He crossed the distance between them with everything he had left, 74 pounds of bandaged, limping, unconditional devotion, and hit Wyatt's chest with both front paws and the full commitment of an animal that doesn't know how to do anything halfway. Wyatt went down to one knee and got both arms around him. Gunner's tongue found his face the same way it had found him in the gate lounge an hour and a lifetime ago. And this time the tears it found were not cold. They were not the tears of a man losing ground to the dark. They were the other kind, the kind that take years to earn. They stayed like that for a long time. When Wyatt finally lifted his head, Evelyn Marsh was there, 10 feet away, watching with the expression she'd worn in the gate lounge, the one that said she saw you and wasn't going to look away. She nodded once. Rear Admiral Carver stood at attention to her left. Behind him, the 12-person federal element had formed up, without being ordered, to instinct and respect working the same muscle. As one, they raised their right hands, a salute. Not to rank, not to assignment. To a man who had kept faith with his country when his country gave him every reason not to, and to the dog who had kept faith with him. The snow that fell now was gentle, the kind that doesn't storm, the kind that simply settles, covering the hard edges of things, filling the places where the cold got in, making the world for one moment quiet. Gunner leaned his full weight against Wyatt's leg. Wyatt kept his hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of breathing. Above them, somewhere in the clearing sky, the stars held their positions. They always had.